Hi, everyone. This is Rosemary Coates in Silicon Valley. I'm your host for this edition of the Frictionless Supply Chain podcast. I'm the executive director of the Reshoring Institute, where we help companies bring back or expand their manufacturing in the U.S. And I'm a contributing writer to Supply Chain Management Review. Today, I'm so pleased to introduce you to Dr. Maria-Elena Giner, the Commissioner of the U.S. International Boundary and Water Commission. This federal commission under the U.S. Department of State has responsibility for applying the boundary and water treaties between the United States and Mexico and settling differences that may arise in their application. But I'm going to let her tell you about her work at the border. We're very excited about this. At the Reshoring Institute, we're in the middle of a very major research project on cross-border commerce, and this fits right in. There's so much growth along the border. So let's get started. Welcome, Commissioner Giner.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosemary. Definitely an honor to be here and to talk about water and the links between water and the private sector.
That's great. So tell us about IBWC and its mission, what you do there.
So the International Boundary and Water Commission is a federal agency that actually reports directly to the President of the United States, but our budget is housed under Department of State. We seek policy guidance from Department of State. And why is that? Well, we are what I call the Corps of Engineers, Bureau of Reclamation on the border. We're responsible for 500 miles of levees. We have real infrastructure that we operate. 500 miles of levees, two of the largest dams in the nation that are ranked 11th and 29th in conservation capacity. We have two international wastewater treatment plants. And like you said, we are responsible for maintaining almost 800 boundary markers and monuments and buoys all along the border. But what is our role with water? So we are responsible for administering two water treaties between the United States and Mexico. One is on the Colorado River, where the United States delivers annually 1.5 million acre feet of water to the Colorado River to Mexico. Then the 1906 convention, where the United States delivers from the Rio Grande 60,000 acre feet of water to Mexico. And then finally from the Las Cruces area all the way down to Brownsville, we operate the infrastructure along the entire reach of that river and comply with also the 1944 water treaty, where Mexico delivers over 5 years on average 1.75 million acre feet of water on average, averaged at 350,000 acre feet for the South Texas and Middle Texas region. So the diplomacy piece of our work is negotiating with Mexico deliveries of water on the Colorado and on the Rio Grande.
So very interesting. I wasn't aware that Mexico was delivering water back to us also.
Right.
And the Colorado, of course, that's a big area of contention between Arizona and California and the US part of it, let alone having water being delivered into Mexico as well. So very interesting.
Right.
So tell us about your background and how you became to be involved with water resources at the US Mexico border.
So to hold this position, you have to be an engineer by treaty. So I'm a civil engineer. I graduated from Loyola Marymount University, go Lions. And after I worked in Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, my first job out of college was Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. And I just loved water. I tried an internship at Caltrans and I hated transportation. So I knew water was my thing. So after Metropolitan Water District, I worked in design and construction of infrastructure related to water. But my first big exposure to bilateral relationships in water was when I worked for the Border Environment Cooperation Commission, which has now been merged with the North American Development Bank. This institution received funding from EPA and both governments to implement water and sanitation solid waste, roads, infrastructure along the US-Mexico border on both sides. It was formed out of NAFTA. They realized that infrastructure was going to be needed with growth. So when that gave me all of the contacts and the exposure of working in Mexico. In 2017, I went back to school and got my PhD in public policy from the LBJ School of Public Policy at UT. And my dissertation focused on water and the health benefits that come with water. So water is very deep in my DNA. In 2021, I had several states and communities call me and ask me if I was interested in putting in my name for the commissioner of the IBWC. And at that point, it was February when I got the first call. I was deep in, I had just run my data and I got what they call statistical significance of my data, which means I had a story to tell in my dissertation and I knew I was going to be able to finish. And so I said yes, and that's where all of the advocacy came for me to take this position and be named to this position, and that's how I got to where I am now.
Wow, that's fantastic. So, as civil engineering is infrastructure building, right? Bridges and roads and that sort of thing. Okay.
Correct,
Ah,
correct. But
so
mostly,
that's a really interesting background, married up with a policy background.
right, right. Because I always want to understand if what we're implementing is it making a difference in the lives? Where are the connections between private and public, right? And so it really has been helpful for me in this position, which is how you and I met,
Yeah.
Rosemary. We found something in common. Most people would think that nearshoring had nothing to do with water.
Well, yes, so nearshoring and manufacturing is heavily dependent on water sources.
Right.
It's next to impossible to have manufacturing without water. So it's very, very important in cross-border commerce. And of course, so many of the companies, especially the ones that we're dealing with, are interested in leaving China and are going to Mexico as potential sources. So that the growth in cross-border commerce is just phenomenal. We were down in Laredo a few weeks ago, and they told us that their annual growth rate is 230 some percent. Just
Right.
astonishing, astonishing how fast the growth is coming. And of course, that's dependent on water. So, what's happening with the water in the Rio Grande and along the border? Are we having difficulties with droughts and climate change and so forth?
So definitely, there's been a lot in the press with regards to the Colorado River and the drought that's going on there. And there's been a lot of funding that's gone to that area and a lot of coalition building that has gone to the area. The Colorado River serves 7 states, 40 million people, from Wyoming all the way down to Nevada, California, Arizona. And so we deliver water to Mexico, and not over 95% of the water that goes to Tijuana is from the Colorado River.
Wow.
Very vulnerable position to be in, because if there's reductions, you really are going to be impacted. Or if there's a major emergency where the aqueduct that takes water to Tijuana is catastrophically damaged, then how are you going to get water to Tijuana, right? That's one example. On the Rio Grande, the South Texas relies primarily on the Rio Grande. And so even the middle Texas, Nuevo Laredo, Del Rio, all of those communities all the way down rely on, and so do the Mexican communities, right? They take water from the river. That region is also experiencing drought, but it's gotten less coverage because of the fact that, one, it serves less people, but two, it also hasn't had the coalition building associated with the Colorado River. Why does the Colorado River have more coalition building? Because on the Colorado River, the Bureau of Reclamation has a very robust science program where they're doing projections and measuring flows and measuring expected flows from the snowpack, and that did not exist in the United States on the Rio Grande up until about less than 2 years ago. Okay.
Wow.
So yes. So before the Rio Grande, 6 tributaries on the US side contribute water, and the others and it's 100% water from the US. It's the Devil Springs, the Pecos, Good Enough Springs. Those are the major tributaries. But on the Mexican side, water comes from the Sierra Madre, which is in Chihuahua, as well as from smaller reservoirs in Coahuila and the Monterrey, Tamaulipas area. Now, why is that a problem? Because historically, the way the United States has received its water from Mexico and how they've been able to meet their obligations of delivering water from Mexico to the United States is just water that has spilled over the reservoirs, water that they cannot capture. And so they have very rarely opened up their dams to deliver water to the United States. And so since 1992, 97, that's a 5-year cycle because they have 5 years to deliver their water. They have pretty much not met the obligations of providing water to the United States over 5 years.
The
And
Mexican side has not met that.
right. They have not met their threshold. So because of that, farmer planning for water in the United States along Texas is monthly. Well, on the Colorado River, it's annually. The states know what they're going to get every year, based on water levels in Lake Mead and Hoover Dam. And I'm drawing this parity because now in the Texas area, we are experiencing a severe drought, just like we're experiencing on the Colorado. We're experiencing the same issues we're recognizing a drought that has been occurring because now we have the science to measure data going back 100 years. Data where we have to measure every drop of water that comes in from these 6 tributaries on each side. So 12 tributaries, right? And determine who owns what water. And so given that what we're experiencing right now is a realization that there has been drought on this river for about 20 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because that science is there now. And so we're barely starting to socialize that. There's starting to be coalescing of cities and irrigation districts. The private sector, that they haven't reached that point of involving the private sector for them to realize these are the issues that are coming down. And so that is why I am ringing the alarm of what is happening in Texas.
Yeah, having lived in Northern California for the last 25 years and experienced drought a couple of different times, I know how scary it is. And if we don't address these kind of issues, you can't expect the area to grow. I mean, you just can't. And I know Arizona is the same way. I grew up in Arizona, and the building has been spectacular in new communities and around Phoenix, and all the growth in housing and so forth all requires water. And
Right.
if they can't get that water, you can't expect there to be any growth. And that's going to affect not only the populations, of course, and manufacturing
Right.
across the border. Well, it's scary. It's scary because we're
Right.
likely to experience more and more droughts, I think, as time goes on with climate change.
Right. And so just to add to what you're commenting, Rosemary, is that the reservoirs in Mexico fill up with tropical storms and hurricanes. Well, on the Colorado River, it's snowpack, which it snows every year. They're challenged. Yes, they get snow every year, but they may not get as much snow, or they may not get the runoff expected. But on this case, if you're dependent on tropical storms and hurricanes to fill your reservoir so you could spill water that comes into Mexico, it really does become an unreliable source. And so that is one of the things that we've been working on for the last year and a half with Mexico, is bringing reliability and predictability to the river.
So when there's a hurricane, you're cheering it on, right?
Right, right.
You
And there
might be the
hasn't
only
been,
one.
right, and there hasn't been one for 20 years.
Ah, okay.
2011, so I guess a little less than 20 years, but since 2011, when Hurricane Alex filled our reservoirs, there has not been one since. There was a
So so
Go
the
ahead.
hurricanes would materialize in the Gulf, right?
Well, yes, but they also have tropical storms that come on the Pacific coast that last year,
Okay.
Chihuahua's reservoirs were filled last year on the Chihuahua side.
Ah, yes, yes. Yes, we had a number of tropical storms in California
Right.
last
So,
year. So I
yeah,
didn't
so we
realize
need them
they
to go a
were
little further south, so they'll hit the
yeah,
Chihuahua, go over the Sierra Madre.
yeah. I mean, when we have a storm like that, it's usually the stories are all about flooding and so forth
Right.
in Southern California. Yeah. So,
No,
but it
Mexico has a really sophisticated set of network of dams that they built since the 1900s, based on modeling, very, very sophisticated modeling that they did at that time to determine the location of these dams.
So if a company wants to relocate to Mexico to manufacture there, is it, I mean, is your recommendation that we're going to have enough water to sustain that along the border? Or should companies be looking for other locations in Mexico?
So the advantage of the water deliveries on both sides of the border, both in Texas and in the Mexican states, is that municipal and domestic are the ones to receive water first, right? And so right now the consumption of water is about 80% agricultural consumption.
Right,
So first cuts will be to agriculture. I think so it is unlikely that cities will see major reductions in water, because the agricultural regions are the ones that are going to receive those first impacts, right? What they will see is a lot of the politics and rhetoric that go along with, agricultural users having their water cut,
right.
right? So that's probably the one thing that they'll see. But definitely there's a good legal framework for keeping the cities with their water.
Okay, okay. So it's supply and demand and climate change and politics all wrapped
Right.
up into into one that is the focus of your attention.
Right. But even so, even just from a responsibility perspective, it really is incumbent on the private sector to get involved in water policy in their communities and in the states that where they're at and in the countries that they're in, right? They should be advocating for efficiencies in the utilities, efficiencies in the irrigation districts, because the irrigation districts are what bring food to the region, right? So there's other domino effects that could
Right,
potentially come from not having enough water in
right,
agriculture. It may not
right,
affect company X manufacturing, but it affects the entire ecosystem of the region.
right, right. The entire supply chain, right?
Right,
Yeah,
right,
so I mean, if it doesn't do much good to have a big population if there's no food. And
right,
so that, yeah, that piece of agriculture is one of those political hot potatoes back and forth, at least in California, all the time. Should,
in both
should the,
countries.
yeah,
Yes, and
should the farmers get all the water or should the population get the water, especially in
right.
drought years? Yeah, really, really fraught with a lot of arguments on both sides.
Right. The last thing we want to do is export our food growth outside of the North America region, right?
Right,
We
right.
do not want a starving population here in the United States, because at that point, that is one thing that I firmly believe will negatively impact, everything, right?
Yeah. So, so Dr. Heener, the people who listen to this podcast are often women coming up in the ranks, and men too, coming up in the ranks in their careers. you are in a senior executive position. How would you coach those young people in terms of what they should be doing for their career growth? And would you encourage them into going into a government position like yours, or where should they go with their careers?
I get that question a lot. I get that question a lot. So I have a husband, three daughters, and I worked when I during my entire child, rearing years. And so I get a lot of questions from women is that when does the guilt go away?
Yeah.
When does the guilt go away? And it's funny because a couple of things is that I grew up into this position professionally. I'll first do that and then talk about the personal element of it. But from the personal perspective, I mean from the professional perspective, I just kept pushing and showing results and pushing and showing results and knew strategically when I needed to advocate for myself, right? Sometimes I wasn't so smart about it, other times I was better about it, right? And what I mean by that is that of course, you're working on team projects and everybody did not pull together equally, right? And this is one of the things I tell my daughters, just look at it this way. You work within your circle of influence. Your circle of influence is yourself. This is what you can control. And what you do that others don't do is their loss because you learn from that experience and they're not going to learn from that experience. And you're just going to have more things that you can put as part of your learning. And one thing I always tell them, if you're not uncomfortable, you will not grow. It's putting yourself in uncomfortable situations where you push yourself to other levels. So again, knowing when to advocate yourself, knowing how to communicate with your supervisor, don't expect them to adapt to you. You need to adapt to them and risking yourself, making yourself uncomfortable, applying for those positions, not being fearful of rejection, right? So that's how I did. I just kept trying and moving forward, and had sexual harassment on, and I had all of these things around me, and
We all.
that is not going to get me down. So just moving forward. From a personal perspective and showing accountability and results, from a personal perspective, the guilt is rough. The guilt is rough. And what I tell people is that one day, all of a sudden, it's not there because you hear your daughters bragging to their friends what their mother does.
Yeah.
And at that point, you say, I'm a rock star mom. And that is what's going to, all of a sudden, the guilt is gone. They don't have a third eye from it or grown an extra arm from it, right? They have good, solid lives. And you said, you know what? I did what I needed to do. But every weekend, I was the mom that was taking on all the surrounding kids and taking them camping and taking them, to the movies and making sure those activities were there. And when I heard one of my daughter's friends say, God, Miss Giner, I wish you were my mom, it like warmed my heart.
There you go. Well, that's wonderful advice. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you for joining us today, Commissioner Heiner. It was so interesting to talk to you about water issues along the border. Can you please give us your contact information if anybody wants to learn more about IBWC or get in contact with you or the agency?
Sure. So we have our chief of public affairs. His name is Frank Fisher. And he could be you can find his name on our website, www.ibwc.gov. And his email is Frank dot Fisher Fisher ibwc.gov. And so that's probably the best way to get a hold of me because I get so many emails. If you contact me directly, it will get lost in my emails. So, and we also have a public affairs email that's on our website that could be looked at. So yes, if anybody wants to feel free, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's another good way to find me on LinkedIn. And I would be, more than happy to share my experience.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And you can listen to more frictionless supply chain podcasts posted on supply chain management, reviews, landing page, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can reach me, Rosemary Coates, at rcoates@reshoringinstitute.org and visit our website at www.reshoringinstitute.org, where we publish all of our research on manufacturing in America. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rosemary. Bye-bye.